right, thank you, sir. Just looking at the list here, we only have 4 of us. So we're just gonna wait for at least one more person to join. Or worst case, I can start reading through the necessary statements. Why don't I do that? Since I think people are getting trained to show up like 3 or 4 minutes after I get through all this.
Yeah, probably.
All right. Well, good evening. This is Gary Trendle, Chair of the Hopkinton Planning Board. It is November 1st, 7 p.m., and I hereby call our meeting to order. This open meeting of the Hopkinton Planning Board is being conducted remotely, consistent with the recently signed an act extending certain COVID measures adopted during the state of emergency. This act includes an extension until April 1st, 2022, of the remote meeting provisions of the governor's March 12, 2020 executive order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. The new law has 2 major parts. First, the new law allows public bodies to continue providing live, adequate alternative means of public access to the deliberations of the public body, instead of holding meetings in a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public. Adequate alternative means may include, without limitation, providing public access through the telephone, internet, or satellite-enabled audio or video conferencing, or any other technology that enables the public to clearly follow the proceedings of the public body in real time. Second, the new law authorizes all members of the public body to continue participating in meetings remotely. The open meeting law's requirement that a quorum of the body and the chair be physically present at the meeting location remains suspended. For this meeting, the planning board is convening by video conference via Zoom app as posted on the town's web meeting calendar and the board's agenda identifying how the public may join. Additionally, the meeting is being broadcast by HCAM through multiple channels. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the town's website via the web meeting calendar, unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda, unless I note otherwise. If members wish to engage in dialogue with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, I'll ask that you raise your hand, wait to be called upon. And after I call on you, please start with your name and address, and then you'll have 3 minutes for any comment. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call. I see that we have, I think, most folks, we have almost everybody here. So let's quickly go through the roll. Sorry, just switching screens here. Members, when I state your name, please respond in the affirmative. Mary?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson here.
Fran? Is Fran here? No Fran. Jane?
Jane Moran, present.
Dave?
Dave Paul here.
Shahidul?
Shahidul Manan here.
Ron?
Reaper here.
Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Mr. Gelsich?
John Gelsich, present.
Ms. Pemberton?
Stephanie Pemberton, present.
And Mr. Paradis? Oh, I see your name, Phil, and I think we can go ahead and move forward without you. And Sundar, last minute, is not able to join us tonight. But first and foremost, I just want to welcome Ron to his first planning board meeting. So I'm glad to have you on board, Ron. We have I think a pretty manageable agenda tonight. We do have a number of administrative items. We've got some committee appointments. We have some discussion on the stormwater management permit for over at the LNG facility. And then the Turkey Ridge hearing has requested a continuation. So we'll just need to open that hearing, take a vote on continuing it, and then we can move to the administrative items. So let's start with that one, and we can check that box and get it out of the way. I'll entertain a motion to open the public hearing for the Turkey Ridge subdivision.
So moved. Mary Larson Marlowe.
Second, Shahidul Manan.
All right, assuming no further discussion, we'll vote on opening the the hearing. When I call your name, please respond with how you vote. Mary,
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob,
Rob Benson, yes.
Jane, Jane, you're muted.
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave,
Dave Paul, yes.
Shahadul,
Shahidul Manan, yes.
and Ron.
Draper, yes.
And Gary Trendle is a yes as well. All right, so we want to continue them to, John, it was November 15th with the decision to November 23rd.
I believe that's correct.
All right, so I will entertain a motion to continue the Turkey Ridge public hearing to November 15th and continue the decision to November 23rd.
Mary Larson Marlowe, so moved.
Shahidul Manan, second.
All right, we have a motion and a second, and assuming no further discussion, we will again do a roll call vote. Mary, how do you vote?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Shahadul?
Shahidul Manan, yes.
Ron?
Ron Draper, yes.
And Gary Trundle is a yes, and I still don't see Fran, but if anybody sees him and I missed him, feel free to speak up. Okay, so that's continued. Let's go ahead and move into the committee appointments. So we, John, do you want to give us a quick update as to what decisions we need to make tonight on these committee appointments?
Sure. So we have two applicants for seats on ZAC, and ZAC has 9 regular members and 5 available associate seats, essentially alternates, should ZAC not get all members attending. So these 2 seats would fill the first 2 alternate seats. So we would still have 3 more alternate seats left. These can be filled. So you would just need to vote to approve James Burton, who's present, and Nisha Nanaware Karate.
Okay. I see Mr. Burton here. Mr. Burton, thanks for joining us this evening. Do you want to provide any comments or summary of your interest in the Zoning Advisory Committee?
Sure, I'm building a house in town. I read through the zoning handbook. Plus I have 20 designation certifications through NAR. So I know the verbiage, but I want to get a little bit more hands-on experience. And actually, now that I know it's an alternate, that's even better. That way I can observe and absorb before I actually have to, take on too much responsibility. So, I'm an app reader and I'm ready to learn.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Burton. Any questions or comments before we vote?
Through the chair.
Yes, Mary.
James, it's a pleasure to have you join the ZAC, and I tell you, most of the discussions are discussions at length, and we only very rarely vote on anything. So an alternate is just as important as a voting member, because the discussions are where the meat of the action happens. So thank you for joining us.
All right, so I'll entertain a motion to appoint James Burton and Nisha Nanaware Karate to 2 of the alternate seats on the Zoning Advisory Committee.
Mary Larson Marlowe, so moved.
Ron Draper, second.
All right, any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll take a vote. Mary, how do you vote?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Fran?
Fran DeYoung, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Shahadul?
Shahidul Manan, yes.
Ron?
Ron Draper, yes.
And Gary Trundle is a yes. So congratulations, Mr. Burton and Ms. Nanaware Karate. Just, you don't need to get sworn in by the town clerk. So, let's see, Mary, do you know when the next ZAC meeting is? Is it next Monday?
I believe it is next Monday.
Okay,
I'll check my
So-
calendar.
if you guys could get sworn in before Monday, then I'm sure the group would love to have you there.
Yes, it is next Monday, the 8th at 7 PM via Zoom.
Okay. Next item, Community Preservation Committee. So we don't have any formal action to take here. This is an appointed position that I have served on for the last, I think about 2 years. Candidly, I just wanted to ask the board if someone else would be interested in serving on this committee. It is, we do have to go through a formal appointment process and posting process, so there's no action to take now. But for me personally, I'm just just looking to shed a little bit of my responsibilities, given all the things happening as chair and some other personal commitments I have. Committees, CPC, I think, is an interesting committee. They have the ability to support a lot of different investments within the community, from affordable housing to various historic properties and features. So, most notably, for example, the exterior refurbishment of the HCA farmhouse is being funded by CPC. Playground at EMC Park, headstone restoration. Sometimes I think they funded a portion of the lights for the athletic facilities, lots of different stuff. So I'm just going to ask if anybody on the planning board would be interested in serving this capacity. It is it's a seasonal one. They tend to meet more in the fall, and then as they sort of firm up their recommendations, there's not much work to do. Any takers? And so, Hadul, I don't know if you saw my email. I thought you actually might be a really good fit for it, but wanted to gauge interest before I formally resign.
Thank you, Gary, for noting me as a potential. I would be interested if that works. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else have any interest? Okay. Well, that's super helpful. Thanks, Shahadul, and appreciate your willingness to take that one on. So we'll go ahead and I'll go ahead and start the initial process tomorrow, and then we'll go through a posting process. It does need to be appointed. It needs to be somebody from the planning board, so should be relatively straightforward. We've just gotta follow the town guidelines on how we do that. So thank you.
Thank you. Happy to serve, and thanks for the opportunity.
All right, next item is the Fox Hollow Pond Street bond release request. John, do you want to just quickly summarize what we're reviewing here? And I know there was a late email that came through as well. I don't know if people had a chance to look at it, but I'm sure that Mr. Paradis can speak to it.
So I'll pull up Beta's letter that I sent out earlier today. Okay, so Fox Hollow is off of Pond Street. It is an OSLPD subdivision that was approved, and they've been building it, and they've gotten to the point now where they're basically complete, and they want to hand the road over to the town. And before they can do so, it needs to get reviewed. The as-built need to get reviewed by Beta. They need to identify work that's still necessary, and then the board can reduce or release the bond as they see fit. So you can see on the screen, not a ton of work left to do. A lot of it's just cleanup. But it may make sense. Sorry, it may make sense to hold on to $5,000 to $10,000 of the bond until the road is actually accepted by town, just in case something comes up, and then fully release the bond after it's been accepted. Or the board can just choose to hold on to $2,700 worth of it, or the applicant can go back and fix everything and have the whole bond released. So there's a couple options here, and the board can make that decision.
John, what's the current bond? I didn't see that in the memo anywhere.
I want to say it's like 100 and Eric, you can tell me. Eric Dias is the applicant. I think it's like 143,000.
$134, 134,094, I believe.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Diaz or Diaz?
Dias.
Dias, okay. And did you have some other comments you wanted to make? I see your hand raised.
Yeah, I just raised my hand. I wanted just to acknowledge that I was here on behalf of FBC Fox Hollow. We have reviewed Beta's letter that we received this afternoon. We don't take any exception to the $2,700 being held back. I think it's appropriate. So I know Mr. Gelsich mentioned we might want to just go get everything done and come back. I think we're content to leave that money in the bond and finish that up as we move through the street acceptance process.
Okay. Yes, go ahead, John.
Would the applicant be okay with leaving 5,000 in the bond?
If to be frank, we'd like as much back as we can possibly get, right? Those are my marching orders, obviously. At 5,000, I don't think we would fight too hard about. We could probably live with it.
Yeah, John, that's going to be my proposal, and just given that, you know, I'm $2,700 is almost so small that you know, and it's just an estimate. I mean, I think if we were to just leave $5,000 in there, then you're still going to get $129,000 back, which is almost all of it, and there's still hopefully enough skin in it that you know, we can count on you to finish up the remaining outstanding items.
Sure.
Any questions or comments from the board?
How much more actual work is there time-wise? Not necessarily dollar-wise, but time.
Honestly, based on what is on Beta and through the chair, excuse me, based on what's on Beta's letter here, we can have that wrapped up within a week of getting guys to the site. I mean, realistically, that's a day, maybe 2 days worth of work.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, so I will entertain a motion to release the bond for Fox Hollow minus $5,000 that to cover the remaining items in the letter in the review and letter from Beta. Yes, John, I worded that wrong, didn't I?
So not to be too nitpicky, you would just reduce the bond, not release the bond.
Thank you. All right, so I'll entertain a motion to reduce the bond to a total of $5,000, to a total of $5,000 based on the review and assessment from Beta.
Mary Larson Marlowe, so moved.
All right, Mary with the motion, Fran with the second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and take a vote. Mary?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Fran?
Fran DeYoung, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Shahadul?
Shahidulmanan, yes.
Ron?
Ron Creeper, yes.
And Gary Trendle is a yes. To Mr. Diaz, thank you very much. It's always nice when we see a letter from Beta saying that things look pretty good. So we appreciate your diligence. And I'm sure we'll see you shortly so that we can close this out all together.
Absolutely. Thank you all for your time and your help. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, was there a question? Okay. All right, moving on to the LNG facility, and I see Tracy and Jim. Not sure who else we need to unmute here.
Tracy and Mike Brady are also on from Eversource.
Okay. Well, nice to see you again. Do you
you.
want to quickly summarize why you are before the planning board this evening?
Sure. We're here on behalf of Eversource. Jim Blackburn, of course, is on as well. The request in front of you is for some additional tree clearing, tree cutting, really, in the vicinity of the new smoke, of the new flare. The reason that we're here is it's really for fire safety. As the flare has been constructed and we're looking at the trees that are in the vicinity, Eversource wants to make sure that this is a safe environment. So they've identified a 100-foot radius in which to remove trees. In order to minimize ground disturbance as much as possible, the trees are proposed to be cut off at the trunks, leaving the stumps in place. Trees that are less than 4 inches diameter at breast height, DBH, will be felled and removed by hand. Trees that are greater will be actually lifted out of the work area here and dealt with within our existing limit of work. So no heavy equipment is proposed outside of the limit of work. And on this photo, you can pretty much tell where the limit of work is. And the green dots here are the locations of the trees that are greater than 3 inches DBH. So there's about 55 trees that we're talking about taking down, some of which are already diseased or dead trees. And that's part of the concern, is we don't want to have the potential for any of those to catch fire.
All right, thanks, Tracy. I have a few questions, but before I get to them, look to Mr. Gelsich. Do you have any comments from Town Hall on this proposal?
Sure. So through the chair, this is kind of a unique process that I don't know if the board has really gone through at this point. So what we're doing right now is part of the stormwater management permit process. The board needs to determine whether the changes proposed are significant or insignificant. If they're significant in terms of the stormwater management permit, the board has two options. One, they can make a determination that it's significant and then kind of figure out what they're going to request from the applicant to address the impacts of the work. The board can also determine it's significant and then require an amended application for the stormwater management permit to be submitted, and the board should really figure out what they want in that amended application to satisfy the questions that they have. The other option is to determine that the changes are essentially insignificant to the stormwater management system and the stormwater management permit. And then we can just draft a letter saying that the board found these changes to be insignificant. You need to do this work as shown on this plan and go along their merry way. So there's really kind of three options here. And if you go with the I'll say first option, but it's really the third option I said, where you determine that it's insignificant, everything is done after tonight. If you go with the other options where you determine that it's significant, they're likely going to have to come back with information to the board. So this is just a preliminary decision at this point, unless you decide that it's insignificant. I spoke to the fire chief this morning to see if he wanted to attend this meeting and give comments. He said he didn't seem to have any issues with what was proposed, especially since it would be reducing the chance for any fire. Other than that, no comments on the project or this work. Haven't heard anything from anybody else, though we didn't really send this around to anybody else because I don't know who would be involved, but I did reach out to the fire chief and I thought that was the most significant person to talk to.
Okay.
That's all I got.
Thanks, John. And just to confirm, this is not something that we could enlist the opinions of Beta on at this point in time.
So I did reach out to Beta as well when I talked to Phil in our meeting and just asked him to stay and give any input to say if he would think that this is a significant change stormwater wise. But yeah, if they actually submitted an amended application, Beta would be the one reviewing those changes. So I think we can enlist Beta's general opinion on this just in terms of significance or insignificance.
Okay. Let's start there. Mr. Paradis.
Yes, I was not aware exactly where this was, but as I look at the diagram, I can see that, so that I can see that it's probably less than 1/4 of an acre of disturbance, relative to trees. If they are going to not grub, not disturb the topsoil, not expose subsoils, there's probably less of a likelihood of any erosion and or sedimentation being an issue, especially if this area also drains south, or I'm not sure if this is oriented north or south, but
It is.
yeah, so if the topo slopes to the south, then obviously that all that runoff from this area would be routed through the rest of the woods. So it's probably not a significant increase in runoff. At least the majority of the site was sea soils anyway. So there was, you get a higher runoff under existing conditions anyway. So there will be a slight increase. I don't know if there's a possibility of planting trees elsewhere where you could kind of make up for it, but I don't think this is a huge lift relative to stormwater management.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Couple of quick questions from me. One, can we assume that the old flare is going to be discontinued?
So the old flare is across the street as part of this project. We haven't committed to completely eliminating them. However, once this liquefaction system is up and running, it really negates the need for those. We have one process system that ties into them. That's why we're a little hesitant in the beginning of this to completely commit to eliminating them, but they won't run throughout the summer as they do today for the liquefaction system. So there's a vaporization system that runs a couple times a year over there. And so if there was a process upset during those, handful of days a year that it runs, there would potentially be a need for those. So we haven't completely committed to eliminating those, though it's highly likely in the future those will either be very limitedly used or potentially eventually eliminated.
Okay, and I think the other ones, those are not in, what's the radius around them of,
They're much larger than this one. So I can't tell you what the radius is around those. I just don't know. But the height of those flares, I think one of them's about 90 feet. I think the other one's 120. This flare is about 40 foot tall. So it's a significantly smaller flare. You won't be able to see this, and it won't run nearly as often as either of those over there. The primary issue with this one is the calculations show it really only needs a 50-foot radius around it. But when you go out there and you look at it, it doesn't seem right that especially with the trees, we're measuring everything to the base of the tree, and a lot of these are kind of have large overhanging kind of branches. And then, as Tracy indicated, they're fairly diseased, many of them. And we just look at it and say, you put the fence up around this that kind of, is our security fence, and then you have a tree drop on top of it into the flare area. It just doesn't make a lot of sense when we have the opportunity to kind of clean this up now. It's just a little bit tighter than, visually that seems right.
Yeah. Okay. And then what's the pitch on the land of the trees that's going to be removed? I mean, just approximate. I mean, it looks reasonably. Go ahead.
Well, so Tracy, you'll have to kind of correct me here. I think the area kind of to the southeast area, perhaps. That's kind of the elevated section. I think that generally slopes to the southwest, and it certainly on the west area drains down to the old quarry in that area, so it kind of funnels to the southwest. I don't believe any of this would go north or northeast or west area.
That is correct. And actually, if you go down to the next, here you go. You can see the grades under there, and you're correct, Jim. It slopes generally to the south and west.
Okay, and just for perspective, any idea what the steepest grade is there?
You know, I'll say it looks like there's some steep grades there. There's, you know, some of the rock piles associated with the quarry in that location. You know, the grade, I'd have to take a closer look at it, but it's not that steep here.
Yeah.
On the west side of that, we have kind of I think a fairly steep slope, and I think it's all riprap, Tracy, going down to the quarry kind of area, if that makes sense.
I think that's what John was just highlighting with his mouse, that little, you can see those little.
That's right. Yep.
So that's all riprap.
So through the chair,
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys can see this, but this dotted line is the 450 elevation. And then this is 440 over here. And then this is 445. So it looks like this is going downhill here. And then going downhill here.
Okay.
So the 450 comes over here.
So about across the width of there, I can see the 5-foot line, and then the next one would be the 10-foot line. So about 10 feet in elevation across the bulk of the site. All right. Those were my primary questions. Questions or comments from the board?
Ron Prefer. Firstly, it's just more of a comment and a question. Firstly, congratulations for thinking ahead for preventive maintenance and ensuring the thought process of, like the potential danger that could exist. You stated that initially the permit was only 50 feet and you wanted to go up to 100. Why 100? Why not 75? Just like split the difference. I'm just curious, what was your inspiration for the 100-foot marker?
So quite honestly, again, the calculations worked out, but it visually didn't make sense. So we literally went out there with a long tape measure, 100-foot tape, and kind of laid out with flags a couple different radiuses, and we had looked at 80-foot and I think 100-foot, and it just, the number of trees that kind of fell into that and condition of those trees, and just visually what kind of made sense, the 100-foot mark seemed to give you a good buffer without being too aggressive. And there's a steep slope, and that kind of quarry that we talked about, there's a kind of an older quarry that was used to mine granite for different locales around in I think the early 1900s. That's kind of off to the bottom, the southwest there. And so we were kind of trying to approach that, and kind of we got into that a little bit and kind of stopped. So I wouldn't say there was any significant science put into it. It was really more kind of what could we take that visually made sense. Again, the calculations work, but visually it just didn't make sense with the overhangs and then kind of the condition of those trees. So we were trying not to be too aggressive, but at the same time we didn't want to have to come in in another year or so and be asking to take a little bit more. So
across the state, like any other like these emergency flare stacks, is 50, 100 a standard marker, or is this just again, you're an expert in this field, so I respect your what feels right argument.
But far from an expert, but what I will say is that the radiuses are determined based on the thermal heat flux that's generated from the flare itself. So the flares up at the other side of the plant are much larger. They can handle a much larger quantity of combustibles. This one is much smaller, and so this only has that 50-foot radius. The other ones presumably, and I don't know what they are, but we'd have to calculate them out, but would presumably be larger. Now, what you typically do is to limit the heat flux encountered at the ground level, you typically raise the flare. So this one's a lot lower. It's at 40 foot. It also doesn't handle nearly as much combustibles. And so it's a calculation essentially based on the height of the flare and the volume or the BTUs that it generates when it's combusting. So it would vary significantly depending on the flare and its use.
But Jim, just to confirm though too, this is based on, the distance is based on the distance to the trunk of the tree, not the canopy of the tree.
That's correct.
I mean, that's where I'm concerned, is I don't know how tall these trees are, but some of them could be 60, 70 feet tall, and extend out from the trunk. So that's where my concern would be that maybe that 50-foot limit isn't really sufficient, given that at the height of the flare, the trees actually could be quite a bit closer.
And if you look at this drawing here, right, and this is what we did during the design phase, you look at the drawing and you can see all the little trees on there, and that's great. But then you go out there and you walk and you kind of see, many of these are growing kind of there's a lot of ledge out there. So some of them are growing at an angle, and they've got large overhangs to them. So many of these kind of, some of the trees on the outer limits of this radius really overhang almost to the existing cut line. So many of them are at a minimum at least 10, 20 feet from the base. So
And through the chair.
Yes, go ahead, Fred.
Yeah, Gary. So Jim, do you have a general sense of the height of some of the older growth trees? Are we talking 70, 80 feet as Gary mentioned, or are they shorter than that?
I think we've got a little bit of a mix. And Tracy, I think your group did a tree count, but we've got a little bit of a mix. There's certainly some larger trees, especially at, there's height-wise, I guess I'd be guessing here, but I think in the past we've talked about 60 to 80 foot tall in the area.
And I would agree with that. There is a mix. There's some that are shorter than that, but you're probably in that range, Jim.
But the trees that are identified in here, many of those are not of that size. That might be a handful, maybe at the most 2 dozen. I think there's generally a lot of smaller trees in this mix here.
Yeah. And with if we move it out to 100 feet, is there any, and I don't necessarily know the kind of layout here, is there any concern that the water runoff would make it down to Wilson Street at all? Or does it slope a different way, so it's not even in play?
Well, Wilson Street would be significantly uphill from here. So okay, this would now slope towards kind of I guess it would be DCR, and then also the property that we just purchased from the sawmill there.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess to give people a sense, this is located generally in the southern, well, this is the southern limit of the project site, and it's generally to the southwest, and the runoff flows southwest from here. Yeah. So Wilson is just off the map here.
Got it. And then the final question is, was there any consideration of replanting some trees? I know you're removing some trees, and I think somebody made a comment early on about potentially trying to look to replant, or is that not something in the consideration set?
We hadn't really considered it. I don't know that I'm necessarily opposed to it. I'm not exactly sure where we'd put them, because generally we have tried to keep the area fairly, we've tried to keep our buffers with the use of the trees. So I don't know that we have a lot of kind of area for it, perhaps over on the property that's adjacent to us that we purchased, where they did some, I think, clearing for maybe the wells, the test wells that they had done when they were considering some development. I don't know that on property we have a lot of opportunity for that, but we could discuss it. I would make, I guess, sorry.
Go ahead, Jim. I'm sorry.
I guess I did want to just put out there kind of just a minor fact. This wasn't our first choice. The first thing that we did do is we did move that flare back a little bit. So we did kind of relocate that. It wasn't much. There wasn't much room to work with, but I think we moved it 10 or 15 feet back, which I think is why I originally had looked at that 80-foot distance, because we had gained a little bit just by physically moving it, and we had that ability, so we took advantage of that. So I won't say that we came to this without thinking first of our other options.
Sure. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Through the chair,
Yes. Go ahead, Shahidul.
Quick question for Jim. Is this the risk that you mentioned, is this a temporary risk only during the construction period, or it's a ongoing risk?
No, it'll be permanent after the commissioning and startup of the new portion of the facility. That flare does not operate nearly as many hours per year. In fact, it's designated an emergency item, and so it's, I think, regulatorily obligated under our air permit to be less than, I think, 500 hours a year. The flares across the street operate regularly during liquefaction during the summer. This one will really relieve the need for that, and this one will only operate in an emergency. So we really should only see this operate several hours a year, quite honestly, pretty minimal. We anticipate probably less than 20 or 30 hours a year, quite honestly. But it will be a continued piece of equipment that is continuously used ongoing.
And I should say too, I think that just to remind, I've kind of deviated from this in my questions a little bit as well, but I think it is worth noting that the reason this is before us is to determine whether or not there is an impact to the stormwater permit. So to some degree, it's probably worth us focusing on whether or not we think there is a significant impact to the stormwater management plan, because that's realistically what should drive our determination on this.
Agree, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Dave.
So I'd like to ask the applicant, well, first of all, just kind of an FYI, I have like a 20 to 30 foot drop off in my backyard with rocks and boulders. And so I know it's hard to maintain. So that kind of leads me to my question about how do they plan to maintain this, and maybe a follow-up question after that.
Go ahead, Jim or Tracy.
I guess as far as maintaining that drop off and that slope, that's all large riprap. It's been out there now the last almost 3 years at this point, which I think we are asking for continuation of that permit, I guess maybe with Concom. We haven't seen very much we haven't seen any erosion really with that. Not to say after this we wouldn't have to perhaps stabilize that a little bit, but we do a fair amount of maintenance ongoing at the facility as far as keeping up the stoned areas, basically everything inside of the fence, the security fence, and usually within about 10 feet of the security fence, we try to maintain as either stone or other non-combustible surfaces. And so we're pretty in tune with keeping up that those areas dressed with, whether it's 3/4 stone or in this case riprap. So we would do that as part of our ongoing kind of continual maintenance of the site.
So let me just give a follow-up to you, Mr. Chair. So you're going to take down trees. I would imagine future trees are going to grow. So that's more along where I was going. Do you plan on, do you plan on weed whacking the area or?
Yes. So we have a company that comes in and trims the trees and keeps kind of the brush at bay from the fences, the security fences, and we would include this as part of that. So pruning, trimming, keeping it down, kind of at grade so that this doesn't reestablish itself over the next, whatever it is, 20 or 30 years.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions? I don't know if there's anybody from the public, but if there were members of the public that had a question or a comment, I'd be open to hearing that as well.
Through the chair, I have a question.
Yes, John.
Would the applicant be open to planting shrubs or bushes in place of the trees?
I don't know, Tracy, do we have some options for a lower growth bushes? I don't know that I'd want to fill that whole area in, but I guess maybe at the perimeter it wouldn't be as consequential. I think in the past you've done blueberry or something that's maybe 3 or 4 foot tall.
Yep. Yeah, we could work with you on some small, low growing bushes.
I don't know that we're sensitive to that. If that, makes a difference. We've got some plantings to do out in front of the property, and then kind of the lay down area that's to the right there. We've got some plans for that, but that would include some landscaping in the future. So, I think we'll certainly be able to get some additional trees if that, makes a big difference. I just wouldn't want to replace the larger trees with just kind of shrub in there that maybe die off during the winter, and then we, create maybe a different issue. Although I think at that distance, at that elevation, it's probably not as much of a concern as the larger trees.
See, I look at it differently. If it's already kind of ledgy soil and you've got a bunch of tree trunks that are cut off at chest height, I worry about how you're going to get those shrubs planted in there. but let me ask a question for Mr. Gelsich. Are you just thinking from a visual perspective, or are you thinking as an additional means of erosion mitigation?
I was suggesting it as a replacement for the trees, both in erosion and water absorption. I wouldn't assume a 1-for-1 would work because I know that the shrubs can get generally wider and then you'd have a much more dense covering, but maybe a 1 shrub per 2 trees removes. Or if you can do some kind of survey of the trees that are healthy and living and replace those in kind and get rid of the diseased and dead ones and don't worry about replacing those.
Planning board members, what are your thoughts? And I guess what we should do is, first and foremost, going back to John's guidance, we should determine if we think this is significant or not to the stormwater plan. And if we do think it's significant, then it's probably worth talking about what we would like the applicant to do. Is that, I think that feels like the right way to approach this. John, I'm looking at you, John. You can't see me looking at your little screen over to the side, but that seems like the right approach, because if it's this insignificant, then we're basically saying, okay, good to go, do what you need to do. Yep, Fran, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, could Mr. Gelsich maybe define significant again for us, just so we have the right context?
So I'm gonna default to the regulations. If I can. So it says, whether the proposed change is, quote, significant based on the stormwater management standards in section 7.0 of the stormwater regulations and construction practices that meet or exceed the purposes and intent of the bylaw and regulations.
So through you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
So I just wanted to, my opinion, I think it's not significant. I think we can get our questions answered tonight and we wouldn't need to revisit this. You know, there's no risk to Wilson Street, which would be our biggest concern. And, you know, as Jim noted, it's most of the runoff's going to be into the woods. And I think what I would just ask the applicant to do is take into consideration our request for trying to add some additional plantings if it works into their plan.
If I may, Chair.
Go ahead, Rob.
100% agree with what Dave was saying. The justification as to why they need to do it, 100% support. And as Dave says, if they under honor code, if they say they're going to plant more brush or tree or little shrubs, I'm perfectly think this is an insignificant ask.
I'm thinking along the same line, and I like John's idea of planting some shrubs to protect if possible. But generally speaking, from what I have heard and the way I understood, it seems not significant.
Okay, so kind of what I'm hearing here is, and we can take a vote on this, but that in our assessment, we would determine that it'd be insignificant, but that at the same time, I'd like to firm up a little bit as to what we would ask of the applicant, because I don't just want to sort of say, plant some things and we're good.
Would you,
you go ahead, Jim.
Tracy, I think we're talking about 20 bushes if you did a 2-to-1. Is that about right?
Yeah, if you did a 2-to-1, considering the taking out the diseased and dead trees that are in there. So we're looking at about 20 shrubs if we did 2-to-1.
Is there a generic term for a certain type of shrub that you'd propose, perhaps, that we could give to the board to kind of just commit to? I don't think I have a major concern. We'll find a way to fit them in there and try to make sure that they, you know, take root and grow. We can certainly commit to that. It's not.
Through the chair.
Yes, John.
I would suggest just a native non-invasive species of shrub.
And we'd probably want to spec out, 2 or 3 species, just to, switch things up a little bit.
We're certainly amenable to something along those lines if I don't know if if this can be conditioned, if it's just a memo or either way, we'll comply with it and make sure it's done for the spring.
Okay, kind of what I'm hearing is it seems like just addressing this through a memo is probably sufficient. I think hopefully it's in your best interest to help maintain it, and it seems like a reasonable solution to just give a little bit of extra insurance to prevent any potential erosion.
So through the chair,
yes.
just to clarify, I anticipate writing a letter just memorializing this vote, that it's not significant, and that the applicant has agreed to plant. Do we want to say 20? Do we want to say between 15 and 20? Do we want to, however we want to word that? The applicant has agreed to plant 15 to 20 or whatever we want to say, native, non-invasive species of shrubs to offset stormwater impacts within. It doesn't even have to be within that radius, realistically, just within the area of the flare or the area of the proposed cutting.
Yeah, I think within the area, the proposed cutting is what makes sense. And I was going to go on the slightly higher side, 20 to 25, because if you're going to go on the high side, or maybe it's just a minimum of 20. And if for some reason you think more makes sense, then have at it. Is that reasonable?
That's agreeable.
Okay. All right. So there's no further comments. Then see, John will correct me shortly when I don't word this the right way. But I will entertain a motion to determine that the modifications. Let's see, that the expansion, modification, I will entertain a motion to determine that the expansion of the existing 50-foot radius around the emergency flare stack be extended to 100 feet is determined not significant, and that the applicant, upon removal, will plant a minimum of 20 native non-invasive shrubs to help mitigate any risk of erosion in the forested area. How did I do, John?
Perfect.
Okay.
Mary Larson Marlowe, so moved.
All right, Mary with the motion. Sorry, is that Dave with the second?
Ron Draper second.
Oh, thank you, Ron. Any further discussion? And seeing none, we'll go ahead and take a vote. Mary, how do you vote?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Fran?
Fran DeYoung, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Shahadul?
Edelman, yes.
Ron?
Ron Draper, yes.
And Gary Trendle is a yes as well. And then, sorry, I just realized that we also have an extension request, and I was focused on the tree clearing. So let's go ahead and move on to the extension request. So I'm assuming, Tracy, do you want to just quickly explain why you're requesting the extension?
So we received our stormwater management permit for this project. So the same project we've been talking about on January 24th of 2019, and that's a 3-year permit for your stormwater bylaws. So we're coming up on that 3-year time in January of 2022. And the majority of the site work we anticipate to be completed by the end of this calendar year, but there's going to be some work that's going to extend into next year, and that's why we're requesting the extension. And in addition, some of the planting that's going to have to be done is going to have to happen next spring during the correct planting seasons. So because of that, we're requesting an additional year on the stormwater management permit.
Okay, and no additional work other than the removal of this new area and planting of some additional shrubs.
That's correct.
Okay. Any questions from the board?
One through the chair.
Yes, Fran.
Would 6 months be a better window, right? Given the amount of work that needs to be done in Q1 and potentially the plantings, or is there anticipation of work to be done in the back half of 22? Or is it just giving you some additional air cover?
I think it's just giving us some additional time. Some of the activities have taken a bit longer than anticipated, and we're extending all of our other permits will be in front of Concom tomorrow as well, requesting a year extension.
Thank you for that.
I will say, Fran, I was thinking the same thing, but I also just sort of knowing the extremities of weather we've had, I worry a little bit that if we had a really wet spring, that I'd hate for them to have to come back again in June or even in May and extend again. So I think just sort of the seasonality of this, I'm personally supportive of giving them another year, especially considering there's no additional work planned.
Through the chair.
In addition, there's one thing that I think it says that only one extension is allowed, and so 6 months, and then we have to do again, and you have to break that extension rule. So I think one extension is having that cushion. I think is the smartest way of doing it.
Thanks, Ron. John, is that the same thing you were going to say?
That is exactly what I was going to say.
All right. All right. Any other further questions, comments? And if not, then I will entertain a motion to extend the stormwater management permit for 5255 Wilson Street to January 24th, 2023.
So moved. Mary Larson Marlowe.
Edelman, second.
All right. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and vote. We'll start with Mary.
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Fran?
Fran Dion, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Shahadul?
Edelman, yes.
Ron?
Ron Creeper, yes.
And Gary Trendle is a yes. All right. Thank you, Tracy and Jim.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate your flexibility there.
Good night.
All right. Last item on the agenda, minutes from August 23rd. Anybody have any comments or updates or recommended changes?
Through the chair,
Yes. Hi, Stephanie.
September 13th.
You know what's funny? I looked at them earlier, and I did this when I just looked at the minutes. I saw the August 23rd, and I thought they were different than that. So I apologize. Thank you for the clarification. Any proposed changes to the September 13th minutes? If there aren't any, then I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes from September 13th, 2021.
So moved.
Edelman, second.
All right. Assuming no further discussion, we'll go ahead and vote. Mary, how do you vote?
I just want to say thanks to Stephanie for doing a fine job with all these minutes. Thank you.
I would agree.
All right. I think we all echo those sentiments. Mary, how do you vote?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Fran?
Fran Dion, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Shahadul?
Edelman, yes.
Ron?
Ron Creeper, abstain.
And Gary Trendle is a yes. So that carries. And that's all we have tonight. So we are 1 minute before 8 o'clock. I'm going to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Mary Larson Marlowe.
Second.
And assuming no further discussion, we'll vote. Mary?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes. Ron, it's
Rob?
not usually like this.
Don't stop. Rob?
Rob Benson, second. I mean,
Fran?
Rob Benson, yes.
Fred DeYoung, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Shahadul?
Kaiser Manan, yes.
Ron?
Good for yes.
And Gary Trundle is a yes. Thank you all.
Thank
Have a
you,
good night.
Gary.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Have a good night.